Just got back from Las Vegas at the Val Expo 2024. I hope you were there. I hope you had a great time. If you weren't there, we're going to give you another chance. Stay tuned and we'll talk about it. But I bumped into somebody. I bumped into a lot of folks. And if you've been a regular listener to my podcast, or certainly if you've been in any of my courses, I talk a whole lot about this little book here. It's called Who Moved My Cheese? It's by Spencer Johnson, MD. It's a #1 bestseller, international bestseller, by the way. It's a great little story about how we as human beings resist change. And we do. Gosh, we do. We like things the way they've always have been. We don't want to change. We love our routine. You know what? We might not like our routine, but we're comfortable. We're very comfortable in that routine. And the thought of breaking up that routine is painful. We don't want to do it. This is a great little story about how we as human beings resist change. I encourage it a lot. You got a major change going on in your life, and I highly recommend it. If someone's lost a loved one, if somebody's getting a divorce, if somebody has lost their job, very often I will send them this book. I might write a little note in and send them this book. It's a great little story about how we resist change, and maybe we ought to rethink that position. Well, come on back. I'm going to tell you about another book that I really have fallen in love almost as much, or maybe even as much, maybe creeping on more than this little story. Come on back, and I'll tell you all about it. Hi, this is Bryan Reynolds. You're listening to the Appraisal Update Podcast, brought to you as always by the great folks over at Appraiser eLearning. You need some education? Check us out at appraisereLearning.com. Also, check out my good friends over at LIA Administrators and Insurance at liability.com. Thank you for your continued support of the Appraisal Update Podcast, your continued support of everything, frankly. They are a regular exhibitor at all of the events. I was at Val Expo out in Vegas. They were there, had a great conversation with them. They also support the Appraisal Report webinar, which we have on a regular basis. So thank you, LIA, for your continued support. We certainly appreciate it. All right, guys, I was talking about my cute little story, and I bumped into this guy. And you can see my picture there with him, Jason Feifer, and it's called Build for Tomorrow. It's a great story taking the Who Moved My Cheese concept a little bit further. It talks about how we resist change and how maybe we shouldn't resist change. You know, one of the things I love about his book, and I love his energy, is when you finally adapt to a new change, it becomes your new routine. And you get comfortable with that new routine. And while maybe not perfect, guys, nothing's perfect. Quit lying to your children. We tell our children practice makes perfect, and that's a lie. That's not true. There's no such thing as perfection. We need to be saying practice makes better. And what Jason talks about is maybe the new change, maybe it's not perfect, but maybe it's better than the old. After all, if you think about the technology, and we use computers now instead of typewriters, you don't go to work riding your horse, you drive an automobile. So he really breaks it down to somebody like I can even understand, which is a big deal. And he talks about how we resist change, but maybe we shouldn't resist all change. In fact, I interviewed him at Val Expo, and I'd like to share that with you right now. All right, so I've got this really good book. I've been reading it. I've been highlighting it. I've been actually putting some stuff in red. If you know me, you've heard me talk about how human beings resist change. It's really hard for us to change. And honestly, most things change. If you don't believe me, look in the mirror. Things are going to change whether you really want them to or not. And I've been talking about a book for, ever called Who Moved My Cheese. I encourage you to get it. It's a cute little story about how we as adults, in particular appraisers, resist change. And if you recognize that, it's very useful. This is an incredible book It's called Build for Tomorrow by Jason Feifer. And hey, look, he's here. He's right here.
Here I am.
Hey, Jason, how you doing?
Hey, well, thanks for picking up a piece of this fine literature.
Hey, man, I have had a ball reading this.
Thank you.
And I'm going to give you a few examples in a minute. But
Please.
before I do, what was your inspiration for this book? Where did this come from?
Well, to be honest, I started writing this book during COVID because what I was watching was everybody go through the exact same change at the exact same time and then radically diverge in how they were responding. And I realized that one of the foundational skills that anybody needs to succeed in business is adaptability. I was seeing some people recognize change as opportunity and use this fear of change as fuel to push them forward. And then I was seeing other people use this fear of change to hold on to what they were losing. And that never, ever satisfied them. And I thought, if I could understand what the most adaptable people do and how they use it as an asset, how they use change to propel them forward, then I would have a guide that could help anybody navigate any major change in their own business or life.
Well, congratulations. It's an excellent read. And, you know, I've been talking about change for a long, long time, before I even knew your book existed.
Yeah.
And this really helps along that journey. You know, what I have found is most folks change for one of two reasons. Either they're forced to change. We were all kind of forced during COVID, to your point.
Certainly.
You might be forced if you get fired.
Yeah.
You might get forced to adapt to change if you lose a loved one. You didn't want that to happen. It was forced upon you. Or the other reason folks decide to change is they get excited, they get motivated, they see it as possibly an opportunity, and they're like, I'm going to try that change.
Yep.
But one thing in your book that really resonated with me is that a lot of history, as things change, once people adapt to that change, it becomes their new routine. You talk about routine, right? You talk about the routine, we're comfortable, and we don't want to break that routine up. So talk a little bit about that, and talk about, like, in particular, the musicians part of your book that resisted records.
Sure, yeah. Well, you find this throughout history, and I love history for two reasons. Number one, because historians will always take my call. Nobody's calling them. And so they're really happy to chat. But number two is because the moment that we're in right now, whatever that is, for any individual appraiser and the way in which they're feeling that change really jostled their business, or just whatever change you are feeling in your own life, you don't know how that story's going to end. You have an idea of how you want that story to go, but you don't know how that story ends. But when you look back in time, what you see is how the story did unfold. And you can see how moments of great disruption in industries were also the moments of most exponential growth and opportunity. So you mentioned musicians. This is one of my favorite tales, is watching musicians be deeply uncomfortable and resistant to recorded music technology, the early record players, and the radio. And they hated it. Imagine being a musician in the late 1800s, and suddenly, you would think this sounds like a good thing, right? Suddenly, records can capture your music, and anybody can listen at any time. Or radio can broadcast your music to anybody. Doesn't that sound like a good thing? But no, to them it didn't, because they only knew two ways of making money. Way number one, live performance. Way number two, sheet music, where you would create sheet music and then you would sell that. And they couldn't imagine anything else. And so when these new technologies came along, they said, this is going to radically decrease the arts, and this is going to harm my ability to make a living. And nobody stopped to think, wait a second.
Could be an opportunity.
This could be an opportunity. And in fact, the people who seized that opportunity, the people who moved towards that opportunity the fastest, were the original winners of that moment. Every change is like that. Because here's the thing, I understand that change can be radical for people and it can be disruptive, and we shouldn't discount that. It's hard, and sometimes it also can be a loss, because the way in which you did something is changing, and that is not going to be easy to navigate, and it may require you to step back and maybe even lose some money or maybe lose some time for a little bit. But here's the thing, and I'm going to say this on stage very soon. We spend far too much time debating whether or not something should happen when it has already happened. And it is not worth that energy to debate whether or not something should happen when it has already happened. And instead, what we need to do is put our energy towards figuring out how to make the most of it.
I love that. You know, in the appraisal world, UAD's coming. It's happened.
Yeah.
All right. The train is coming. Now you got a decision to make. You're gonna get on the train or not, right? One of the other things, and I'll let you go. I know you're a busy guy, and we got a whole audience waiting on you right now. One of the things I loved was routine. That's your routine. You're comfortable in your routine.
Yeah.
You like your routine. You don't want to change your routine.
No.
But when you finally do change your routine, now you have a new routine. And what I loved, and the example I give is, how many appraisers use a mobile device out in the field? Almost none. 70% are still. Come on, try it. Well, and they have this limiting belief. I can't see it. What if I drop it and break it, right? And then I asked the same audience, how many of you use multiple monitors? And 80% use 2 to 3 monitors. And I said, well, you adapted to that change, but you're resisting this one. Let me ask you a question. I use this out of your book.
Sure.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
But I say, how many of you would like to go back to using one monitor?
Right.
No. Why? Because I'm more efficient. Oh, you've adapted. That's your new routine. So talk about that. What can appraisers, or anyone for that matter, do to keep an open mind about developing the new routine where they ain't going to go back to the old routine?
Yeah, well, this is how I'm going to give you a little preview because this is how I always end my talks. I say, look, we ask this question of every change, and that is this perfect? We ask ourselves, is this new thing that I'm doing, is it perfect? And because every change involves friction, involves getting used to it, getting comfortable with it, thinking about the thing that you used to do and how maybe that isn't accessible to you anymore, nothing feels perfect. Nothing is ever perfect. So it's a terrible question to ask. If you want to evaluate change, you have to ask yourself a different question. And that question is this: is my new problem better than my old problem? Because when you do that, you create room for problems. And you track your progress through problems. It is a far more realistic way of understanding what change is really like. I bet that those people, when they started adding their second or their third monitor, it required some adaptation.
Sure.
It required them to start thinking about how they're doing things differently, and maybe some system that they had created to do everything on one monitor was no longer useful, and they had to spend some time going, oh, right, this thing's actually over there now. And that wasn't easy, but the end result was a better system.
And they're not going back.
And they're not going back. They're not going back, and we all need to be pushing ourselves to explore whether or not there's something better out there. Are we protecting imperfect systems at the expense of building something better? We should be asking ourselves that all the time. I'll repeat it. Are you protecting an imperfect system at the expense of building something better? If you do not feel confident in the answer to that question, then try something new and see how it works out.
I love it. Jason Feifer, thank you so much for stopping by and
Thanks for
talking to
having
me.
me.
Buy his book. I guess they can get that anywhere, right? Amazon.
Yes, you can.
Buy the book, buy the book, buy the book. Hey, look at that camera and say, go Val Expo.
Go Val Expo. Thanks for having me.
Well, you heard it. I mean, Jason is the man. He is a wealth of information. I encourage you to get that book and check it out. Build for Tomorrow. You'll be glad you did. It's a great little story. You know, for 45 years, LI Administrators and Insurance Services has been offering E&O insurance to valuation professionals all over the country, just like you and I. They apply superior customer service, exceptional liability education, unparalleled claim defense to serve well over 10,000 real estate professionals all across the land. LIA offers commercial bonds, general liability, cyber liability, and so much more. Visit liability.com today to learn all about it. Now, I told you a moment ago, maybe you got another chance, all right? Maybe you couldn't make it out to Val Expo. And we certainly understand everybody's very, very busy these days. You got a lot going on. So let's just look at maybe another possibility you've got, really just coming up right around the corner. So if you look at appraisereLearning.com, check out our website. Man, there's a ton of information there. So you need some CE, check us out. You need some information, check us out. We give a lot of good information to you for free. So I like free. I'm sure you do too. But if you go to appraisereLearning.com, here's our website. If you go under live events and you just drop right down here to the Appraisal Summit, we have our next event coming up in Las Vegas over at Planet Hollywood. And here is the event screen that you can find out all about it. September 14th through the 17th, we have pre-conference education. I'll be teaching my brand new course on short-term rentals. We got a lot going on. Of course, the board of directors meeting, as always, will be available, and that's open to anyone. We've got all kinds of sponsors. We would love to see you in Las Vegas at the Appraisal Summit. Until next time, make some money, take a little break, take a little vacation. You better gear up because I think you're about to start getting very, very busy. We hope so anyway. I think you're about to get busy. Until next time, I'm your host, Bryan Reynolds. Happy appraising.
The Appraisal Update Podcast is brought to you by Appraiser eLearning.